Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Sleepy Science Adult. As we step into the new year, 2026, I know many of you are here to relax and gently drift into sleep. Before your eyes grow heavy, feel free to leave a comment and share where in the world you're listening from tonight. If these episodes help you rest or fall asleep, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Now, get comfortable, let your breathing slow, and allow yourself to settle in. In this new story, what did this man see right before he disappeared? The last confirmed record of the man came from a device that continued recording after he stopped responding to the world around him. Investigators later agreed the data suggested he was reacting to something directly in front of him. Calder Rowan was 39 years old and worked as a regional utility surveyor for a private contracting firm. His job required long hours outdoors, often alone, inspecting access routes, drainage lines, and remote easements. He was known by coworkers as methodical, cautious, and unlikely to take unnecessary risks. On the morning he disappeared, Calder was assigned to verify markers near a lightly trafficked public trail. The area bordered protected woodland, but remained open to hikers and maintenance workers. His task was routine and expected to take no more than half a day. Calder arrived just after sunrise and parked his truck at a gravel turnout beside the trail entrance. A security camera from a nearby access gate later showed him locking the vehicle and checking his equipment. He carried a phone, a handheld GPS unit, and a compact field camera used for documentation. He entered the trail shortly before 8:30, following a clearly marked route through mixed hardwood forest. The weather was stable, cool, and dry, with no conditions that would affect visibility or footing. Nothing about the morning suggested danger or urgency. At 9:14, Calder logged his first waypoint and uploaded a confirmation photo. It showed a numbered marker fixed to a post exactly where records said it should be. His posture appeared relaxed, and there were no signs of distraction or stress. Over the next hour, Calder continued moving steadily along the route. His phone data showed consistent pacing and regular pauses where markers were inspected. Each stop matched known locations on the survey map. At 10:32, the data pattern changed. Calder slowed near a shallow bend where the trail narrowed briefly between dense brush. The GPS showed him step slightly off the path, then stop. For several minutes, his device recorded no forward movement. There was no indication he fell or stumbled. The pause appeared intentional, as if he was observing something nearby. At 10:39, the field camera activated. It captured a single image before shutting down. The image was later recovered from internal memory. It showed the forest ahead, but not as it appeared from the trail. The trees were arranged in a straight, unnatural line. The ground between them looked bare and level, unlike the uneven forest floor around it. Less than a minute later, Calder's phone microphone activated. The recording began with quiet ambient noise. Then his breathing changed. He did not shout or call for help. In a low, uncertain voice, he asked a single question. "What is that?" The recording ended abruptly. Calder did not make another call, send another message, or log another waypoint. When he failed to check in by midday, his supervisor attempted contact. By late afternoon, authorities were notified and a search was initiated. Calder's truck remained parked where he left it, untouched. Search teams entered the trail before sunset. They followed Calder's recorded route without difficulty. Everything matched the data until they reached the narrow bend where he had stopped. There, they found his footprints leaving the trail. The prints were measured, evenly spaced, and showed no sign of haste. They led forward several yards, then slowed. The footprints ended at the edge of a small open space. There were no marks beyond that point. No return tracks, no disturbance, and no indication Calder had turned back. Searchers stood at the boundary, scanning the trees ahead. From where they stood, there was nothing unusual to see. Yet according to every record left behind, Calder had stopped because he was looking directly at something that made him ask a question he never finished answering. By the following morning, the search expanded beyond the initial trail segment and into the surrounding woodland. Teams expected to find signs of continued movement, but the ground offered no direction past the open space. The clearing measured just under 15 feet across and sat slightly lower than the trail. Leaf litter covered most of the soil. undisturbed except where Calder's footprints ended. There were no drag marks, broken branches, or compressed vegetation beyond that point. Investigators documented the area carefully and flagged the perimeter for reference. From every angle, the space appeared ordinary, with no structures, depressions, or hazards. Nothing explained why Calder would stop there, let alone disappear. Attention shifted to the recovered image from Calder's field camera. When compared to photographs taken from the same position later, the differences were obvious. The straight line of trees shown in Calder's image did not exist in reality. In the present forest, trunks were irregularly spaced and interrupted by undergrowth. In Calder's image, the trees formed a near-perfect row with clear ground between them. Forestry records showed no planting activity, logging operation, or land management history matching that pattern. Audio analysts reviewed the brief recording from Calder's phone. Background sounds were consistent with the environment, but his breathing pattern changed abruptly near the end. There was no panic, only hesitation, followed by silence. Tracking dogs arrived later that afternoon. They followed Calder's scent from the trailhead without difficulty. At the clearing, the dogs slowed, circled, and refused to cross the boundary where the footprints ended. Handlers described the behavior as disorientation rather than fear. The dogs repeatedly returned to the same edge, sniffed the air, then backed away. No amount of encouragement changed their response. Aerial support was brought in before dusk. Drones passed overhead using visual and thermal imaging. No heat signatures appeared, and the canopy showed no breaks or signs of concealment. Investigators reviewed carrier location data from Calder's phone. For several minutes before transmission stopped, the coordinates shifted slightly with each update. The movement did not correspond to physical travel, but to gradual positional drift. Technicians attempted to overlay the data on modern topographic maps. The final points failed to resolve to any registered terrain. The system returned blank space, as if the location could not be defined. Search leaders considered equipment malfunction, but testing ruled it out. Other devices in the same area reported stable coordinates. Only Calder's data showed progressive displacement. After 3 days, the active search yielded nothing further. No gear, no personal items, and no evidence of injury or departure. Everything indicated Calder had walked forward, stopped, and then ceased to exist within the mapped environment. Privately, several investigators admitted the case defied routine explanation. Calder had not run, fallen, or been taken. He appeared to have reacted calmly to something he could see, then vanished where the forest showed nothing at all. After 10 days, the official search effort was scaled back and eventually suspended. Calder Rowan was never found, and no physical evidence explained where he went after leaving the trail. The case remained open, though it received little public attention beyond a brief local notice. Internally, several departments continued reviewing the digital evidence. The unanswered questions centered on what Calder reacted to in those final moments. Weeks later, a geospatial analyst was asked to examine the location data more closely. He compared Calder's final coordinates against historical survey grids and legacy mapping systems. One inconsistency appeared when older reference frames were overlaid. An archived boundary map from decades earlier showed a narrow corridor that no longer existed. It was marked without description, classification, or ownership. That corridor intersected the precise location where Calder's coordinates stopped resolving. Further review revealed the corridor was removed during a regional remapping update. No explanation accompanied the deletion, and no replacement designation followed. The area was absorbed into surrounding land without documentation. The analyst noted the older grid used a different positional reference. When translated imperfectly into modern systems, it produced slight spatial offsets. Those offsets closely matched the drift recorded in Calder's phone data. Investigators returned to the site with updated equipment. Nothing appeared out of place, and the clearing looked no different from surrounding forest. Measurements showed no anomalies in elevation, magnetics, or soil composition. Calder's devices were eventually returned to storage. His phone powered on but showed no additional data beyond what had already been recovered. Attempts to extract deeper system logs caused the device to freeze repeatedly. Technicians advised against further testing. Shortly afterward, the phone failed permanently and was sealed with the case file. No explanation was documented for the failure. The official report concluded Calder likely suffered a fatal incident that could not be recovered. Privately, several investigators disagreed with that assessment. There was no mechanism that explained how he left no trace beyond the clearing. The trail remains open today. People pass through the same bend without noticing anything unusual. From their perspective, the forest looks ordinary and continuous. Whatever Calder saw did not leave a visible mark. If something existed there, it did not persist in mapped space. Only a brief sequence of data suggests he stepped forward into something no longer recognized by the landscape. A hiker who never explained what he experienced in Appalachia. Gideon Vance was a 42-year-old land surveyor who lived in the quiet outskirts of Boone in North Carolina. He spent his long days mapping the remote Appalachian wilderness trails and locating historical boundaries that had been reclaimed by forests. In the month of September in 2026, he was assigned to a section of woods called Grid 74. This specific area of the mountain was reportedly known for its heavy fog and its very confusing and strange magnetic anomalies. Gideon packed his rugged survey gear and several days of food into a heavy and worn leather mountain rucksack for travel. The first morning of the expedition was surprisingly warm, but the air felt heavy with an unusual and static electrical charge. He arrived at the trailhead early and parked his white truck under a cluster of old and dying hemlock trees there. Gideon stepped onto the dirt path and felt the familiar weight of his equipment settle comfortably against his very strong back. The forest was almost completely silent, except for the sound of dried leaves crunching beneath his heavy leather boots as he walked. He reached the center of the grid after several hours of climbing and began to set up his brass survey tripod. Gideon noticed a strange arrangement of white stones that looked like a small doorway resting near an ancient and gnarled oak. The stones were covered in thick green moss, and they appeared to have been placed there many long and lonely years. He felt a sudden chill as he walked past the stones, but he ignored the feeling and continued his mapping work. He finished the first section of the grid and decided to set up his small tent near a shallow mountain stream. The sun began to dip below the jagged peaks, and the shadows grew long and reached toward his small campsite there. Gideon ate a simple meal of dried beef and drank some water while he listened to the evening sounds of forest. The first night was relatively quiet, but he woke up once to the sound of a distant and very high whistle. He thought it was just the wind moving through the narrow canyons, but the sound felt very intentional and quite sharp. Gideon fell back into a restless sleep and dreamed of cold stone hallways that led deep into the dark mountain peaks. The following morning was filled with a thick gray mist that made it very difficult to see more than 10 feet. Gideon packed his gear quickly and began to move toward a valley that was famous for its ancient and deep caves. He found another stone doorway standing in the middle of a trail that was not recorded on his official survey map. This doorway was taller than the first one, and it had a small bundle of dried mountain herbs hanging from it. Gideon took several photographs of the herbs and wondered if a local survivalist was living somewhere nearby in the dense woods. He continued walking, but he started to feel like someone was moving through the brush just out of his blurred vision. Every time he stopped to listen, the forest would go completely silent, and the wind would suddenly stop blowing for him. Gideon reached the second section of the grid near a rocky outcrop and decided to build a small fire for warmth. As the sun began to set, he heard that same high-pitched whistle echoing from the ridge he had just crossed. He grabbed his flashlight and scanned the thick tree line, but he could not see any movement in the gathering dark of. Gideon sat by the fire and tried to convince himself that the sound was just a bird or perhaps a goat. He barely slept that night because he kept hearing the sound of soft footsteps circling his tent in the damp mountain. Gideon woke up at dawn and found a third stone doorway standing exactly 3 feet away from his small tent entrance. This doorway had a small piece of rusted metal hanging from the top by a thin piece of dirty white string. He reached out and touched the metal, only to realize it was an old house key with his name on it. The name on the key was Gideon Vance, and the date 2009 was stamped on the back of it. He felt a wave of nausea hit him as he realized the key looked exactly like the one for house. Gideon did not finish his breakfast and instead began to pack his gear as fast as he possibly could manage. He began his descent toward the valley, but he noticed that the trail appeared different than it did on his map. The path seemed to twist and turn in ways that did not make any sense according to his trusty compass. Gideon found a fourth stone doorway, and this time there was a small scrap of yellow fabric tied to it. He recognized the fabric immediately because it was the same material as a raincoat he had lost many years ago there. Gideon began to run down the steep trail as the shadows grew longer and the air turned into a biting cold. He kept looking over his shoulder, but the thick mist hid whatever was following him from his terrified and searching eyes. He finally reached his truck and drove home while he kept checking his rearview mirror for any signs of movement. Gideon arrived at his cabin and found his dog Cooper barking at the back door with a very aggressive tone. He walked inside and checked every single room to make sure that no one had entered while he was away. Gideon sat at his kitchen table and began to scroll through the photos he had taken during his long mountain hike. He zoomed in on the background of the third photo and saw a tall and thin figure standing very still. The figure was wearing a yellow raincoat that looked exactly like the one he had lost back in 2021. He felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead as he realized the figure had been following him home then. Gideon grabbed his laptop and began to search through online archives for any other surveyors who had worked in Grid 70. He discovered an old newspaper article from 1942 that described a missing surveyor named Elias Thorne in this area. The article stated that Elias had vanished without a trace while mapping the same remote section of the Appalachian Trail then. Gideon found a scanned copy of the original police report, which mentioned several small stone doorways near the last location. He also found a recorded dispatch call where a witness claimed to see a tall figure in a yellow raincoat. Gideon then inserted the memory card from the motion-activated trail camera he kept on his back porch for security. The footage from 2 hours ago showed the same tall figure walking slowly across his backyard toward the locked back door. The figure stopped at the porch and held up a small stone doorway that was identical to the trail markers. It placed the stones on his welcome mat and then looked directly into the camera lens for several long seconds. Gideon realized that the figure was not a human being, but something that had been waiting for his return home. He watched the video again and noticed that the figure was holding the same house key found on the trail. The figure reached out and touched the doorknob of his back door before it turned around and disappeared into night. Gideon walked to the back door and looked out the window, but he could only see the dark shapes. He looked down and saw a small pile of white stones arranged in a perfect circle on the wooden porch. The house key he found on the trail fit perfectly into the lock of his back door without any resistance. Gideon felt his heart racing as he realized the figure had been inside his house while he was still away. He checked his bedroom and found that his old yellow raincoat was hanging neatly in the back of his closet. The raincoat was soaking wet and covered in the same green moss he had seen on the first stone doorway. Gideon also found a small journal resting on his nightstand that he did not remember ever owning or writing in. The journal contained sketches of stone doorways and maps of the Appalachian Trail that were dated to 1984. Every page was filled with the same high-pitched whistle written in musical notes that he could not understand. He looked at the last page and saw his own name written in dark ink with today's date on. Gideon Vance realized that he had not just found a mystery, but he had invited something very old into his quote. He locked every door and sat in the dark while he waited for the sound of a high-pitched. He watched the closet door slowly begin to open as the clock struck 12 in the quiet and dark cabin. Gideon reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small digital recorder he used for his daily survey notes. He decided to document everything he had found because he was not sure if he would see the next morning. He recorded the details of the stone doorways and the strange key that belonged to a man from the past. Gideon also described the feeling of being watched by the figure in the yellow raincoat that he once wore there. He mentioned the specific archive files from 1942 and the police reports that described the disappearance of Elias. The house felt very cold as he spoke into the microphone, and he could hear his dog Cooper whimpering softly. Gideon checked the trail camera footage one last time and noticed a second figure standing near the edge of woods. This new figure was shorter and was wearing clothes that looked like they belonged to a hiker from the past. He realized that Elias Thorne was not just a missing person, but he was now part of the dark mountain. The whistle sounded again, but this time it was coming from inside the walls of his own small and dark, Gideon stood up and grabbed a heavy iron fireplace poker to defend himself from whatever was hiding in the house. He walked toward the kitchen and saw that the small stone doorway on his mat had been moved inside then. The stones were now arranged in a circle around his favorite wooden chair where he usually sat to read books. Gideon felt the air pressure in the room change as if a large and heavy door had been opened nearby. He looked at the window and saw his own reflection staring back at him with eyes that were completely black. The reflection did not move when Gideon moved, and it began to whistle the same high-pitched and haunting tune. He dropped the iron poker and fell to his knees as the sound filled every corner of his tired mind. He understood now that the stone doorways were not markers for the trail, but invitations for the very ancient things. Gideon Vance was no longer alone in his cabin, and he knew that his story would end in the dark. The digital recorder continued to run as the sound of footsteps approached the bedroom where he was currently sitting alone. The last thing recorded on the device was the sound of a heavy door closing and a soft and low. Investigators would later find the cabin completely empty, with no signs of a struggle or any forced entry at all. They found the yellow raincoat and the small pile of white stones resting on the kitchen table in a circle. The house key for the back door was found resting inside the pocket of the wet and very mossy coat. Gideon Vance was never seen again in the town of Boone or anywhere along the long Appalachian Trail path there. His white truck remained at the trailhead for several weeks until the local police finally towed it away for good. The case remains open in the files of the county sheriff, but no new evidence has ever been found. Some stories in the mountains never truly end because the woods have a very long memory for the lost souls. Reported sightings of a tall figure in a yellow raincoat continue to haunt the area around Grid 74 today. Local hikers avoid the remote section of the trail and speak of the high-pitched whistle that echoes in fog. Witness statements from 2009 describe a similar event that occurred to a man who lived in the same. Archived calls from dispatch logs show that several people have reported finding small white stone doorways in the deep woods. Police reportedly found a series of survey maps in Gideon's truck that showed locations of doorways that do not exist. Final footage from his digital camera showed a thick mist entering the cabin through the gaps in the wooden floorboards. The mist appeared to take the shape of a doorway before the camera cut to black and stopped recording then. Records from the State Geological Survey show that no such grid called 74 was ever officially commissioned for mapping. Gideon Vance had been working on a project that did not exist according to the records in the state capitol. His family reportedly received a letter in the mail 2 weeks after he vanished that contained an old brass key. The key was weathered and covered in green moss, but it fit the lock of his childhood home in Asheville. Some say that Gideon is still out there mapping a mountain that exists only in the spaces between the trees. In this news story, multiple people vanished on the same trail. Archived incident summaries from a remote national park reference a single trail that appears repeatedly in unresolved missing person cases. Officially, each disappearance is treated as unrelated. Unofficially, rangers avoid discussing the trail at all. The trail was not dangerous by reputation. It was well marked, moderately graded, and frequently used by day hikers. It cut through mixed forest and followed a gentle ridgeline before descending toward a popular overlook. Families walked it every season without incident. That was what made the disappearances difficult to explain. Rethan Cole was 49 and worked as a senior search operations planner assigned to the park's western district. He did not patrol trails regularly anymore. His role focused on reviewing case files, allocating resources, and identifying trends that required attention. One trail kept returning to his desk. The first case occurred nearly 10 years earlier. A solo hiker failed to return from a morning walk. His vehicle was found at the trailhead, locked, with no signs of distress. Search teams located footprints leading up the trail, then stopping abruptly less than a mile in. No tracks continued beyond that point. At the time, the disappearance was classified as disorientation followed by exposure. No remains were found. 3 years later, another hiker vanished on the same trail. She was experienced, carried navigation tools, and planned a short loop hike. Her last known location placed her on the same ridgeline segment where the earlier trail went silent. Again, tracks ended cleanly. Search dogs lost the scent at nearly the same location. Rangers noted the similarity but did not flag it formally. Rethan became aware of the pattern after the third disappearance. This time, two friends were hiking together. They walked side by side until one stopped to adjust a boot. When the second hiker continued ahead and rounded a shallow bend, his companion was gone moments later. There was no sound of movement, no call for help, no sign of panic. Search teams arrived within hours. Dogs tracked both hikers to the bend, then stopped. No footprints led off the trail. No broken brush marked an exit point. Rethan requested all files tied to that trail segment. When he overlaid the cases, the alignment was exact. Same stretch of trail, same subtle bend, same loss of evidence. The terrain offered no explanation. There were no cliffs, no fast water, no dense undergrowth immediately nearby. Visibility returned within a few steps beyond the bend. Rethan visited the trail himself during a routine inspection. He walked it slowly, stopping at the marked location. Nothing appeared unusual. The trail narrowed slightly. Trees leaned closer. Sound seemed to soften for a few steps. Then it returned. He stepped forward and the forest felt normal again. Rethan documented the sensation and dismissed it as expectation bias. Still, he could not ignore the cases. Over the following years, 2 more people vanished on that same trail. Both disappearances occurred during daylight, weather was mild, visibility was good, both hikers were alone. In every case, search teams found the same thing. Tracks leading in, nothing leading out. Rethan knew coincidence could explain 1 case. It struggled to explain 5. He flagged the trail internally for closer review and requested permission to study the disappearances as a group rather than individually. The request was denied. Each case remained officially separate. The trail stayed open, and people kept walking it. Rethan pressed forward anyway, working within the limits of what he was allowed to do. He requested time-stamped maps, original ranger notes, and canine handler summaries from each case. The paperwork told a quiet story that public summaries did not. In every disappearance, search teams reached the trail quickly. In every case, initial conditions were favorable for tracking. Weather was calm. Ground cover preserved impressions. Dogs were deployed correctly. The failure point was always the same stretch of trail. Handlers used similar language across different years. Scent strong, then absent. Not scattered, not confused. Gone. Rethan met privately with one of the senior handlers who had worked 2 of the cases. The handler said the dogs did not behave like they had lost a trail. They behaved like the trail had ended. No pull, no drift. No widening search pattern, just a stop. Rethan returned to the trail with a small survey team. They measured grade, soil composition, and vegetation density. Nothing stood out. The bend was shallow, the slope was gentle. There was no obvious place to fall or hide. They recorded ambient sound levels at several points along the trail. Readings showed a brief drop near the bend, subtle but repeatable. Wind stalled there, then resumed a few steps later. Footsteps sounded closer than they were. A geologist consulted on the data suggested mixed bedrock beneath the trail could create acoustic shadowing. Sound behaved oddly in narrow corridors. People sometimes slowed or hesitated there without realizing why. That explained discomfort. It did not explain disappearance. Rethan reviewed witness statements again. In the case involving the 2 friends, the surviving hiker described the moment clearly. He said it felt like time skipped. He looked up, and his friend was gone. There was no noise, no warning, just absence. Another witness from an earlier case had used similar language. Quiet, empty, like the trail swallowed sound. Rethan noticed something else. In each case, the missing person was slightly ahead of companions or alone. The separation happened forward, not backward. People stepped into the bend, believing the path continued safely, because it always had. Rethan proposed installing temporary cameras near the trail segment, framed as a usage study. The request stalled in review. There was concern about privacy, cost, and precedent. The trail remained unmonitored. Internally, the tone shifted. Colleagues cautioned Rethan to stop connecting cases. Patterns created panic. Panic created liability. The official stance remained unchanged. The trail stayed open. Another disappearance followed. A trail runner failed to return from a midday loop. Her watch data showed steady pace until the familiar bend. Heart rate normal. Then no further data points. Search teams found her tracks leading in, nothing beyond. Rethan felt the weight of repetition settle heavily. 5 cases became 6, all at the same place, all daylight, all clean stops. Veteran rangers began adjusting behavior quietly. Patrols doubled near the bend without explanation. Teams responded faster to calls from that trail. New rangers were told to stay within sight of partners there without being told why. Rethan compiled a private summary and stored it offline. He did not label it a theory, he labeled it a pattern of absence. What unsettled him most was not that people vanished. It was that the land left no argument behind. No struggle, no debris, no direction. The trail offered nothing to follow. And without a trail, every search began already behind. The final case Rethan reviewed before stepping back from the trail came quietly and ended the same way. A middle-aged photographer entered the trail late in the morning, planning to reach the overlook and return by early afternoon. Weather was mild, visibility was clear. Other hikers passed him near the trailhead and remembered nothing unusual. His camera was found days later, resting on a rock several yards before the bend. The strap was neatly coiled, not dropped. His phone showed one last photo taken moments earlier. It framed the narrow section of trail ahead, trees leaning inward, the path appearing shorter than it really was. There were footprints leading to the camera. There were none beyond it. Rethan closed the file slowly and did not request additional resources. The search followed procedure and ended without results. The report used familiar language. Probable disorientation. No evidence of foul play. Case unresolved. Not long after, Rethan transferred out of active review. Officially, it was a routine reassignment. Unofficially, he understood that pushing further would not change the outcome. The trail would remain open, the cases would remain separate. What changed instead was behavior. Veteran rangers began walking the trail differently. They slowed near the bend, they waited for partners to remain in sight. When visitors asked why patrols lingered there, the answer stayed simple. It was a common place for mistakes. During one routine patrol, Rethan walked the trail one last time. He stopped at the bend and listened. Sound softened. Distance felt compressed. The world ahead seemed closer than it was. He stood still and waited. Nothing happened. After a few moments, the sensation passed. Birds returned. Wind moved through the trees again. The trail looked ordinary. That was the part that stayed with him. The place did not feel dangerous. It felt briefly incomplete, as if the space ahead had not finished forming yet. Rethan left the park soon after. His private files were archived but never indexed. New rangers learned the trail through experience rather than instruction. They noticed which sections drew quiet attention. They noticed which disappearances felt familiar even when details differed. The trail remains open today. Families walk it, runners train on it. Most people pass the bend without noticing anything at all. But among those who have studied the cases, there is an understanding that never makes it into reports. The disappearances were not random. They did not happen everywhere. They happened at the same place under the same quiet conditions. The land did not chase anyone, it did not trap them, it simply allowed a moment where separation could occur without warning. And once that moment passed, the trail closed behind them cleanly. Tracks led in. Nothing ever led out. In this new story, search teams found no footprints in this national park. Search and rescue teams at a high-elevation national park once faced a situation that immediately broke every standard assumption. Fresh snow covered the ground, conditions were clear enough for tracking, yet there were no footprints at all where 2 hikers were believed to have vanished. The situation began just after sunrise when a trailhead ranger conducting a routine winter check noticed a vehicle parked in a restricted lot. The area was reserved exclusively for permitted backcountry travel during winter months. The vehicle was registered to 2 hikers who had signed out the previous afternoon and failed to return by their stated time. Edrin Cavale was 51 and served as the senior operations coordinator for the park's search and rescue unit. He had spent over 2 decades managing missing hiker cases across steep terrain, avalanches, sudden storms, and medical emergencies. Very few situations surprised him anymore. This one did. Permit records showed the hikers planned a short overnight route along a ridgeline before descending into a sheltered basin. Both were listed as experienced winter travelers. They carried avalanche beacons, emergency shelters, and adequate cold weather gear. Nothing about the plan raised concern at the time. Weather reports from the night before showed steady snowfall, totaling nearly 8 inches. Temperatures stayed well below freezing, and wind speeds remained low throughout the night. Under those conditions, tracks usually preserved cleanly until late morning. Edrin arrived at the trailhead with the first response team as daylight filtered through the trees. The parking area showed a single, clear set of tire tracks leading into the lot. No other vehicles had entered overnight. What stopped him immediately was the ground around the car. There were no footprints. Snow pressed evenly against the doors, wheel wells, and rear bumper. No tracks led toward the trail, no disturbed snow surrounded the vehicle at all. It looked as if the car had appeared there without anyone stepping out. Edrin ordered the team to halt and document the scene before moving any closer. Photographs confirmed what his eyes already told him. The snow surface extended smooth and unbroken from the parking area into the tree line. Even animal tracks were absent, which was unusual for that region. Standard procedure assumed hikers exited their vehicle and entered the trail shortly after arrival. Even cautious movement would leave impressions in 8 inches of fresh snow. Yet, there was nothing. The vehicle inspection raised further questions. Inside, food supplies were neatly packed, extra clothing was folded, 2 large winter packs sat untouched in the back seat. According to the permit checklist, those packs were required gear for the route. The ignition was empty. The keys were missing. Edrin noted that detail carefully. Missing keys suggested the hikers exited the vehicle. The lack of footprints suggested they did not. He contacted dispatch to verify the permit station interaction. Rangers who checked the hikers in the previous afternoon remembered them clearly. They were calm, alert, and familiar with winter conditions. They discussed weather forecasts and avalanche advisories briefly before leaving. A second response team arrived with tracking specialists and a canine unit trained for snow conditions. Dogs were deployed from downwind positions to avoid contamination. Both animals circled the vehicle briefly, then stopped. Neither established a trail. One handler quietly told Edrin that the dogs behaved as if the scent ended abruptly rather than fading. By mid-morning, Edrin expanded the perimeter. Teams moved outward in careful arcs, scanning tree wells, slopes, and drainage lines. They found nothing. Branches remained unbroken. Snow loads rested evenly on low limbs. No signs of passage appeared anywhere. Edrin requested aerial support. A helicopter sweep confirmed the same result from above. The snow surface surrounding the trailhead looked untouched in every direction. Fresh snow, which normally made searches easier, had erased the story entirely. By early afternoon, Edrin reviewed weather data again, looking for any sign of strong winds or drifting that could have smoothed tracks. The data showed nothing extreme. Conditions remained stable through the night. Edrin felt a quiet unease settle in. Every missing hiker case began with a last known point. This one did not even offer that. He marked the trailhead as an anomaly and prepared to escalate the operation, knowing that without footprints, the search had already lost its most critical advantage. Edrin expanded the operation early the next morning, bringing in additional rangers and a second canine team from a neighboring district. He ordered strict movement control, knowing that every new track risked destroying something subtle. Teams advanced in staggered lines, stopping often to reassess the snow surface ahead. Nothing appeared. The dogs behaved the same way as before. They circled briefly, checked the air, then disengaged. Handlers reported no clear scent pool, no directional pull, and no confusion caused by wind. The dogs simply had nothing to follow. Edrin shifted focus to the vehicle again. He inspected the undercarriage, the roof, and the surrounding snowbanks. A faint compression mark near the rear bumper caught his attention. It looked like downward pressure without any sliding or step pattern. Someone might have stood there briefly, distributing weight carefully. Still, there was no trail leading away. Edrin consulted a snow science specialist assigned to the park during winter months. Together, they examined the crystal structure near the vehicle. The top layer showed recent snowfall, light and powdery. Beneath it was a thin, hardened crust formed by earlier temperature fluctuations. Under rare conditions, that crust could briefly support weight without collapsing. If someone stepped out during that window, impressions might have been shallow enough to vanish quickly once new snow settled. The theory explained how tracks could disappear near the car. It did not explain why nothing appeared beyond that area. On the second day, teams moved downslope into natural travel corridors. Disoriented hikers often follow gravity. Rangers checked drainages, tree wells, and leeward sides of ridges where signs sometimes survive longer. Late that afternoon, a ranger radioed in a find nearly a mile downslope. A small fragment of reflective fabric lay frozen into slush along a narrow creek channel. The material matched emergency bivy sacks commonly carried by winter hikers. There were no tracks leading to it. The following morning, another ranger located a single glove lodged beneath ice farther along the same drainage. It was a winter glove rated for cold exposure. Again, no approach trail existed. Edrin plotted the locations on a map. Both items aligned with a natural funnel that would draw someone downslope during poor visibility. The spacing suggested movement rather than random loss. Edrin assembled a working hypothesis. The hikers likely exited the vehicle during a brief lull in snowfall, stepping onto hardened crust. They may have intended only to assess conditions or reposition the car. New snow then erased shallow impressions almost immediately. Disorientation could have followed quickly. Whiteout conditions compress space and erase reference points. Even experienced hikers can lose bearings within minutes. Instinct often drives movement downhill. As they moved, crust beneath their steps may have collapsed and resealed repeatedly, leaving no lasting trace. Fresh snowfall continued to erase what little evidence remained. Edrin briefed the team on the theory, careful to present it as possibility rather than certainty. Search patterns adjusted accordingly, pushing farther downslope and widening the radius. Days passed with no further discoveries. Pressure mounted to transition the operation to recovery status. Weather worsened. Resources thinned. Probability dropped sharply. Edrin delayed the decision as long as he could, knowing that without a trail, the search was already fighting time itself. By the fifth morning, weather forecasts turned against the operation. Another storm system approached, bringing higher winds and deeper accumulation. Helicopter support was grounded. Ground teams faced increasing avalanche risk. Edrin stood at the trailhead before sunrise, reviewing maps that now felt more symbolic than useful. The search radius had grown wide, yet the absence of a starting trail meant every direction carried equal uncertainty. Without footprints, time had erased sequence, and sequence was how searches survived. He made the call to shift from active rescue to recovery. The decision was procedural, but it weighed on him heavily. Recovery status did not mean giving up. It meant acknowledging that survivability windows had likely closed. Teams would continue searching, but with reduced urgency and fewer resources. Over the next several days, rangers focused on terrain traps. Deep tree wells, narrow ravines, and low visibility corridors received attention. Probes were used where snow depth allowed. Dogs were redeployed after brief thaws in case scent emerged. Nothing changed. The snow remained smooth in some places and violently reshaped in others. Each storm rewrote the landscape again. Whatever story the ground once held was gone. A week later, Edrin compiled the official report. He chose his language carefully. The document stated that rare weather conditions likely erased initial evidence, preventing early tracking. Subsequent snowfall eliminated remaining signs before search teams could establish direction. Privately, Edrin added a supplemental training note. He wrote that fresh snow does not always reveal movement. Under specific conditions, it can hide it completely. He emphasized that the absence of evidence should be treated as evidence itself, not as failure of observation. Months passed. Spring arrived. Meltwater carved new channels through the basin. Crews returned to the area once snow receded enough for safe travel. They searched again with different tools and different light. No remains were found. No additional gear surfaced. The case remained officially unresolved. Years later, new rangers learned the story during winter briefings. It was not presented as mystery or legend, but as caution. The environment does not always leave clues. Sometimes it removes them with precision. The parking lot still opens each winter, vehicles still arrive and leave, snow still falls quietly overnight. But among those who know the case, that trailhead is remembered for one unsettling fact. Two people stepped out into fresh snow, and the ground never showed where they went. In this new story, this park's missing cases follow the same timeline. Internal case timelines from a large national park reveal a coincidence that was never formally acknowledged. Too many missing person cases followed the same sequence of events down to the hour, even when circumstances appeared unrelated. The park stretched across vast wilderness with long trails that crossed forest, ridgelines, and alpine basins. Visitors arrived year-round. Some got lost, some were injured. A few never came back. That part was not unusual. What unsettled veteran staff was how consistently certain cases unfolded once someone went missing. Dale Morin was 58 and worked as the park's incident timeline analyst. His job began after searches concluded. He reconstructed events using radio logs, dispatch records, witness statements, and timestamp data. He was not interested in why people vanished. He focused on when everything stopped. Over years of reviews, one pattern became impossible to ignore. In case after case, the missing person was last seen between late morning and early afternoon. Not at dawn, not at dusk. Almost always during the same narrow window when daylight felt stable and urgency felt low. The first case Dale revisited involved a solo hiker who vanished on a popular loop trail. Witnesses saw him resting near a viewpoint just before noon. Rangers reached the area within 2 hours. By mid-afternoon, dogs had lost the trail. By sunset, the search stalled. The timeline repeated. Another case followed the same structure. A trail runner failed to return from a midday loop. Her watch data showed normal pace until early afternoon. Search teams arrived quickly. Dogs tracked her to a point on the trail and stopped. The active search lost momentum before nightfall. Dale overlaid dozens of cases. Different trails, different years. Same arc. Last sighting late morning or early afternoon. Initial search response strong. Evidence disappears within hours. Search stalls before the first night ends. He noticed something else. Families reported missing members later in the day, often at sunset. Rangers were already behind the curve by then. The critical window had passed quietly hours earlier. Dale examined radio traffic from early searches. The same phrases appeared repeatedly. We're at the last known point. No further sign. Holding position. Reassessing. Those phrases clustered in the same time block. Mid-afternoon. Canine logs showed similar timing. Dogs tracked cleanly for short distances, then stopped within hours of disappearance. Not the next day. Not after weather changed. The scent ended quickly, almost immediately. Dale began asking questions quietly. Why did momentum always collapse before nightfall? Why did evidence vanish so fast under stable conditions? Why did so many cases share the same rhythm? He consulted a search behavior specialist who reviewed the timelines without knowing locations. The specialist said the pattern suggested early disorientation rather than prolonged wandering. People stopped moving purposefully soon after last contact. That explanation fit some cases. It did not fit all. In several incidents, witnesses reported the missing person was calm moments before vanishing. No signs of fatigue, no panic, just a brief separation. Dale labeled the phenomenon internally as the early stall. Once a case entered that phase, recovery odds dropped sharply regardless of resources. Administrators dismissed the idea. Timelines varied in every search. Similarities were inevitable across years of data. Dale continued tracking. By the time he reached his 10th year in the role, he had identified more than 20 cases that followed the same hourly sequence. The dates differed, the trails differed, the order never did. The park did not have random disappearances. It had a schedule. Dale pushed deeper into the data once he accepted that the timing itself was the anomaly. He stopped grouping cases by trail or terrain and began grouping them by hour. When he did that, the pattern tightened. Most disappearances began quietly between 10:30 and 1:30. The last confirmed sighting almost always landed inside that window. What followed was remarkably consistent. Search initiation was fast. Resources deployed efficiently. Confidence remained high for several hours. Then, around mid-afternoon, something changed. Radio logs showed a subtle shift. Early transmissions were decisive and directional, units moved with purpose. After 2 or 3 hours, the language softened. Teams reported holding positions, reassessing grids, waiting for instruction. Momentum slowed without any single event causing it. Dale charted those shifts minute by minute. The slowdown almost always began between 3 and 4 in the afternoon. Weather data offered no explanation. Conditions often remained stable. Visibility stayed good. There was no sudden storm-forcing retreat. The stall happened regardless of season. Canine performance followed the same curve. Dogs tracked strongly during the first hour or two. Then, handlers reported the same issue. Scent ended. Not weakened, not scattered, ended. The timestamp on those reports clustered tightly in mid-afternoon. Dale interviewed several handlers who had worked multiple cases. When asked why the dogs disengaged, none had a clear answer. They described it as unnatural, but struggled to explain why. The dogs were alert, focused, ready to work. There was simply nothing left to follow. Dale reviewed witness behavior next. In many cases, companions waited longer than expected before reporting someone missing. Not because of negligence, but because the situation felt temporary. Someone stepped ahead. Someone lagged behind. The separation felt minor. By the time concern set in, hours had passed. That delay mattered. Dale compared cases where reports came in early versus late. Even when reports came in early, the same stall occurred. Speed did not prevent it. It only brought teams to the last known location sooner. And once they arrived, the clock resumed its pattern. He consulted a cognitive behavior analyst familiar with wilderness response. After reviewing anonymized timelines, the analyst pointed to a phenomenon called false stability. During midday hours, people underestimate risk because conditions feel safe. Decisions to pause, wait, or assume reunion feel reasonable. That explained reporting delays. It did not explain the synchronized collapse of evidence. Dale noticed another detail. In several cases, watch data and phone logs showed brief gaps or irregularities shortly after the last sighting. Not full signal loss, just missing minutes. Time that could not be accounted for cleanly. Those gaps always occurred early. By the time searches began in earnest, whatever happened had already finished. Dale began referring to the sequence as the quiet window, a short period when people disappeared without triggering immediate alarm, followed by a rapid loss of usable evidence. Once the window closed, the case entered what he called the stall phase. No amount of manpower reversed it. Administrators resisted the framing. Timelines were complex, coincidences happened, the park could not plan around invisible windows. Dale understood the resistance. Acknowledging the pattern would mean admitting that response success depended on minutes no one could reliably control. Still, the data remained. Over and over, the same arc. Calm departure, midday separation, early evidence loss, mid-afternoon stall, nightfall without direction. By the time darkness arrived, the search was already behind. Dale prepared a briefing note suggesting earlier intervention triggers even when reports sounded minor. The proposal stalled in committee. Resources were limited. False alarms were costly. The park continued operating as it always had. The timeline continued repeating. As Dale prepared his final annual review before transferring out of the role, he added a section that never reached public circulation. It was labeled Operational Observation and contained no conclusions, only timing charts. The charts showed the same curve repeating across years. Once a case entered the quiet window, recovery odds dropped sharply. Once the stall phase began, direction vanished. By nightfall, the search continued out of obligation rather than expectation. Administrators reviewed the summary and removed the charts. The written explanation remained generic, searches were complex, outcomes varied, no systemic issue was identified. Dale understood why the material was cut. A timeline could not be fenced off or posted on a sign. It could not be repaired with equipment or staffing. Acknowledging it would create responsibility without remedy. Still, small changes followed. Dispatchers were encouraged to treat midday separation calls with greater urgency. Rangers were advised to escalate faster when last sightings fell within certain hours. None of this was written as policy. It was passed along quietly. In the years that followed, a few cases broke the pattern. Early intervention prevented full stalls, dogs maintained trails longer, evidence lasted past mid-afternoon. Those cases ended with recovery or rescue. Others did not. The familiar arc continued to appear, just often enough to remain undeniable to those watching closely. The park never announced a timeline risk. Visitors were never warned that certain hours carried more weight than others. Dale returned to the park once after leaving the position. He sat at a busy overlook and watched hikers come and go. Most arrived late morning. They rested. They took photos. They moved on without concern. Nothing about the moment felt dangerous. That was what the data had taught him. The risk did not arrive with storms or darkness. It arrived during the calmest part of the day when people assumed time was on their side. Dale closed his notebook and left it in the glove compartment of his car. He no longer worked cases, but the pattern stayed with him. He could not forget how many searches ended before they truly began. The park continues to operate as it always has. Trails open each morning, rangers patrol, visitors disappear rarely, but not randomly. When it happens, the sequence still unfolds the same way. A calm start, a brief separation, a delay that feels harmless, then a narrowing of options that no one sees until it is complete. By sunset, the timeline has already done its work. The park does not advertise this. It does not explain it. Officially, there is no shared schedule behind the missing cases. Among those who study them, there is a quieter understanding. Some places do not decide who goes missing. They decide when. In this new story, why rangers quietly closed this trail after the searches. Publicly, the trail was closed for maintenance. Privately, rangers knew that explanation was only partly true. The real reason never appeared in any press release or visitor notice. The trail sat in a remote section of the park that received steady but not overwhelming traffic. It followed a narrow ridge for several miles, passed through mixed forest, and descended toward a small alpine basin. Hikers liked it because it felt isolated without being dangerous, until it was. MrBallen was 52 and worked as the park's operations supervisor, overseeing patrol schedules and post-incident reviews. He was not a search lead, but every unresolved case eventually crossed his desk. When 3 searches ended on the same trail within 4 years, he noticed. The first disappearance involved a solo backpacker who failed to return from a 2-night trip. His vehicle was found at the upper trailhead, locked and undisturbed. Search teams deployed within hours. Dogs tracked him cleanly for nearly 2 miles, then stopped near a narrow section where the trail cut between rock and trees. There were no tracks beyond that point. The case closed months later as probable exposure. No remains were found. 2 years later, another hiker vanished on the same trail. Weather was clear, daylight was ample, he was experienced and carried navigation tools. Witnesses saw him earlier that morning heading uphill alone. Search teams again tracked him to the same stretch of trail. Dogs stopped at nearly the same location. No evidence led off the path. The search ended quietly. At the time, the similarities were noted but dismissed. The third case changed that. This time, 2 hikers were traveling together. They separated briefly when one stopped to adjust a pack strap. The other continued ahead for less than a minute. When the second hiker rounded a shallow bend, the first was gone. There was no sound. No call for help. No visible exit point. Search teams responded immediately. Dogs tracked both hikers to the bend and stopped. Rangers widened the grid and searched for weeks. Nothing was found. Marrow reviewed the files side by side. Different people, different years, same trail, same segment, same outcome. That was when internal discussions began. Officially, the trail remained open. There was no hazard identified, no structural defect, no environmental threat that justified closure. Closing it would raise questions the park could not answer. Privately, patrol behavior changed. Rangers lingered longer near the problem section. Solo patrols were discouraged without explanation. Search response times for that trail were quietly shortened. Marrow requested a comprehensive terrain assessment under the guise of routine review. Specialists examined erosion, stability, vegetation, and drainage. The report found nothing that warranted closure. That made the decision harder. Over the next year, 2 near misses occurred. In both cases, hikers reported losing sight of companions briefly near the same stretch. Both described a sudden, quiet-like sound dropped away. Both reunited moments later, shaken but unharmed. Those reports never reached the public summary. Merrow convened a closed meeting with senior rangers and search coordinators. The discussion was careful and restrained. No one used dramatic language. They focused on outcomes. The trail produced unresolved searches. It produced clean stops. It produced no explanations. Eventually, the question shifted from why it happened to what responsibility the park had once it noticed. Merrow drafted a proposal to close the trail temporarily for assessment. The language cited maintenance, erosion control, and visitor safety improvements. No mention was made of disappearances. The proposal was approved without debate. Within weeks, signs went up. The trail was listed as closed until further notice, maps were updated quietly, no announcement was made beyond routine postings. Visitors asked questions. Rangers gave the approved answer: maintenance. What they did not say was that searches stopped after the closure. No new disappearances were reported on that trail once access ended. Merrow knew correlation was not proof. He also knew that leaving the trail open meant accepting a pattern they could not explain or fix. Merrow pushed the internal review further once the trail was officially closed, using the cover of maintenance planning to revisit details that had never sat right. With access restricted, rangers could walk the trail slowly, stop where they wanted, and document without worrying about visitors overhearing conversations. They started at the upper trailhead and moved as a group. Nothing felt wrong at first. The ridge was stable. Sightlines were clear. Radio checks came through normally. It was only when they reached the narrow section where every search had stalled that behavior changed. Radios crackled, then went quiet for several seconds before reconnecting. Wind that had been steady along the ridge seemed to drop completely. Footsteps sounded closer than they should have, as if the slope compressed distance. No one said anything at first. One ranger finally broke the silence and asked if anyone else felt the pause. Another nodded and said it felt like the trail flattened time for a moment. A third said he suddenly felt the urge to stop walking without knowing why. Merrow marked the spot carefully. Over the next weeks, teams returned multiple times under different conditions: morning, afternoon, clear weather, light cloud cover. The sensation did not happen every time, but when it did, it happened in the same 50-yard stretch. They consulted outside specialists quietly. A geologist confirmed mixed bedrock beneath the trail that could create subtle vibration damping. An acoustics consultant noted the corridor formed a natural sound shadow. Neither finding suggested danger. Both suggested altered perception. None of it explained disappearance. Merrow reviewed radio logs from the original searches again. He noticed something that had been overlooked. In each case, there was a brief gap in radio traffic when teams first reached the problem section. Not long enough to trigger alarms, long enough to mark hesitation. He interviewed the rangers who had been present years earlier. Their memories were vague, but similar. They remembered stopping, looking around, waiting for instructions that never came, then resuming the search with less certainty. No one remembered why they stopped. The near-miss reports took on new weight. In both cases, hikers said they felt suddenly separated despite being only steps apart moments earlier. Both described the same quiet and the same urge to pause. Merrow documented everything, then locked the file behind administrative review. He understood now why previous supervisors had avoided formal acknowledgement. There was no corrective action to recommend. You could not post a sign warning people that the trail might make them hesitate. The question became ethical rather than procedural. If a trail repeatedly produced unresolved searches and no mitigation existed, did the park have a duty to close it even without a defined hazard? The answer was reached without a vote. They would keep it closed, permanently, if necessary. The maintenance explanation would remain. Rangers would not discuss the real reasons publicly. Doing so would invite speculation, fear, and attention the park could not manage responsibly. Merrow accepted that burden. In the months after closure, patrol logs showed something else. Search call volume dropped slightly in that district. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. No new cases followed the same pattern. The absence of incidents felt heavier than their presence ever had. After a year passed without incident, pressure began to build to reopen the trail. Visitor numbers were climbing elsewhere, and the closed route offered an easy release valve for congestion. Maintenance reports showed no structural issues remaining. On paper, there was no reason to keep the trail closed. Merrow was asked directly whether the closure was still necessary. He answered carefully. He said the trail continued to present unresolved concerns related to visitor safety and response reliability. He avoided specifics. The statement was enough. The closure stayed in place. Internally, the trail was reclassified. It no longer appeared on seasonal planning maps. New rangers were not assigned to patrol it unless required. The trail faded from daily operations without ceremony. What remained were the records. Merrow archived the internal review under restricted access, alongside other documents rarely revisited. The file contained no conclusions, only observations, clean stops, repeated hesitation, searches that reached a point and could not move beyond it. Years later, a new supervisor asked why the trail had never reopened. Merrow had already retired by then. The answer came from an older ranger who had worked one of the searches. He said simply that some places do not give evidence back once they take it. The explanation was accepted without follow-up. The trail itself changed slowly. Without foot traffic, vegetation crept inward. Fallen branches remained where they landed. The narrow corridor that once unsettled search teams became harder to recognize at a glance. Occasionally, hikers asked about the closure. Rangers gave the approved response. Erosion, safety, ongoing assessment. Most visitors moved on without concern. Those who pressed further were told that the park had many trails and limited resources. Not every route needed to remain open forever. What rangers did not say was that the closure solved a problem they could not name. No further disappearances were tied to that trail. No last known locations stacked up. No searches ended at the same silent stretch of ground. The absence became the strongest justification. Merrow visited the park once after retirement. He stood at the locked trailhead and looked down the path that had caused so many quiet meetings. Nothing about it looked threatening. It never had. That was the reason it stayed closed. Danger that announces itself can be managed. Danger that feels ordinary cannot. The park never reopened the trail. No marker explains why. No sign mentions the searches. Officially, it was a routine closure that outlived its purpose. Among rangers, the reason was understood without being spoken. Some trails do not need accidents to prove they are unsafe. They only need silence. In this news story, they entered the park separately, none came back. 3 people walked into Red Ridge State Park on a chilly Saturday morning in early November 2021. Each had their own reason for being there, none of them came back out. The park was a sprawling expanse of dense woods and winding trails about 30 miles outside the city. It wasn't particularly famous or scenic, but it was quiet, a place where people could disappear for a few hours without anyone noticing. That Saturday, the weather was overcast with a biting wind that kept most visitors away. Only a handful of cars sat in the nearly empty lot when the first of the 3 arrived just after sunrise. Lila Marquez was 34 and worked as a freelance graphic designer. She often spent weekends hiking to clear her mind and snap photos for her growing Instagram account. That morning, she carried her camera bag and wore sturdy boots, ready to capture the muted colors of late autumn. Her last post before heading out showed a steaming cup of coffee with the caption, "Time to chase some views." No one knew exactly which trail she planned to take. Around 45 minutes later, a silver sedan pulled into the lot. Out stepped Calvin Rourke, a retired high school teacher in his late 60s. He moved slower these days, favoring a cane, but he still loved birdwatching. His binoculars hung around his neck, and he carried a small notebook to jot down sightings. According to his wife, he mentioned wanting to spot a red-shouldered hawk, a bird he'd been trying to photograph for months. The third person didn't arrive until nearly 10 a.m. A young man named Ethan Cole, 22, had driven straight from his night shift at a gas station. He was lanky, with dark hair that always looked messy, and he rarely spoke unless spoken to. Friends said he liked coming to the park to think, though no one really knew what he thought about. That day, he brought nothing but a hoodie and a pack of cigarettes. Park rangers found their cars still parked neatly in the lot 2 days later. By then, concerned family members had called the authorities. The search began immediately, but something felt off from the start. There were no obvious signs of trouble, no broken windows, no dropped belongings, no indications of struggle near any of the vehicles, just an eerie absence. Detective Nora Hale led the investigation. She was in her mid-40s, sharp-eyed, with a reputation for solving cases others gave up on. When she arrived at the scene, she noticed something strange right away. All three cars were locked, and none of them contained anything unusual. No wallets, no phones, no maps. It was as if the owners had deliberately left everything behind. The trail cameras told part of the story. Grainy footage showed Lila entering the main path toward the South Ridge, her camera bag slung over one shoulder. About 20 minutes later, Calvin appeared on a different camera, heading north toward the meadow where hawks were often spotted. Ethan showed up last, walking briskly along the eastern edge of the park. Their paths never crossed in the recorded footage. Search teams combed the area for days, but the forest swallowed them whole. Rangers reported feeling uneasy as they ventured deeper, describing an unnatural silence blanketing the woods. No birds chirped, no squirrels scurried, not even the rustle of leaves broke the stillness. One volunteer claimed he heard distant voices calling faintly through the trees, though no one else could confirm it. Then came the discovery that changed everything. A maintenance worker stumbled upon a pile of discarded items hidden under brush near the northern boundary of the park. Among them were Lila's camera bag, its lens shattered, and Calvin's notebook, pages torn and smeared with mud. Ethan's lighter lay nearby, scratched and dented as if it had been stomped on. None of the objects bore fingerprints despite forensic testing. Witness statements painted a confusing picture. A couple who lived near the park recalled seeing flashes of light in the distance that night, like headlights bouncing off trees, but they dismissed it as teenagers joyriding. Another neighbor reported hearing muffled shouts sometime after midnight, though she couldn't pinpoint the source. Everyone agreed the weather turned suddenly harsh that evening, with freezing rain coating the ground by dawn. Detective Hale focused on the park itself. Records revealed it had been built decades ago atop land once used for mining operations. Old maps hinted at tunnels running beneath the surface, long abandoned and forgotten. Some locals whispered about sinkholes swallowing livestock whole, while others swore they'd seen figures standing motionless at the tree line, watching silently. Hale decided to investigate the tunnels. With permission from higher-ups, she assembled a team to explore the underground network. What they found chilled them to the bone. Deep within the labyrinth, they uncovered evidence of recent activity, fresh footprints in the dust, scraps of fabric snagged on jagged rocks, and faint markings carved into walls. One symbol stood out repeatedly, 3 intersecting lines forming a triangle. Back above ground, researchers analyzed the carvings. They matched ancient designs linked to indigenous tribes believed to have inhabited the region centuries earlier. Legends spoke of a sacred site buried deep within the earth, guarded by spirits who punished intruders. While many dismissed such tales as folklore, the resemblance between the symbols and those found in local archives was undeniable. As weeks passed, public interest waned, but Hale refused to let go. She revisited every detail, searching for connections others might have missed. Then, buried in archived reports, she found something startling. Over the past decade, at least 5 other individuals had vanished under similar circumstances, all entering Red Ridge State Park alone, leaving their vehicles untouched and never returning. Each incident occurred during late fall, coinciding with shorter daylight hours and colder temperatures. The pattern was undeniable. Something about the park drew people in, only to trap them forever. Whether it was natural, supernatural, or something entirely different remained unclear. But one thing was certain: the park held secrets far darker than anyone imagined. Months later, Hale stood at the edge of the lot, staring into the dense woods. She'd done all she could, but the answers eluded her. Families grieved without closure, their questions unanswered. Yet life went on, as it always did. The park reopened eventually, though fewer people visited now. Those who dared to enter spoke of an oppressive weight settling over them, urging them to turn back. In the end, the mystery of Red Ridge State Park stayed unsolved. a haunting reminder of how little we truly understand about the world around us. Somewhere deep within its shadows, three souls rested, their stories unfinished, their voices silent. And so, the park waited, patient and unyielding, for the next visitor bold enough to step inside. Detective Nora Hale returned to her office after the case went cold. She spent hours reviewing notes, staring at photographs of the discarded items, and replaying interviews in her head. Something nagged at her, a detail she couldn't quite place. It wasn't until she revisited the grainy footage from the trail cameras that she noticed it. In the background of Lila's video, just as she disappeared around a bend, there was a flicker, a shadow moving unnaturally fast across the frame. Hale requested enhanced analysis of the footage. Technicians isolated the movement and slowed it down. What they found was baffling. The shape was humanoid, but too tall and thin to be human. Its limbs bent at odd angles, and it seemed to glide rather than walk. Skeptics argued it could be a trick of the light or a digital artifact, but Hale wasn't convinced. She reached out to a geologist to better understand the park's underground structure. Dr. Miriam Klein, a specialist in karst topography, explained how the limestone beneath the park could create vast caverns and unstable ground. Sinkholes were common in such areas, she said, but so were pockets of toxic gases that could disorient or incapacitate anyone who wandered too far off trail. This new information prompted Hale to revisit the tunnels. On her second descent, she brought specialized equipment to detect gas levels and seismic activity. As they moved deeper, the air grew heavier, almost suffocating. Sensors began picking up elevated levels of carbon dioxide and methane. The team pressed on cautiously, guided by faint sounds echoing through the passages. They reached a chamber unlike any they'd seen before. The walls were covered in intricate carvings, far more detailed than the ones found earlier. At the center stood a stone pedestal, cracked and weathered, with the same triangular symbol etched into its surface. Scattered around it were bones, brittle and ancient, mixed with fragments of clothing and personal effects. Some items appeared decades old, while others looked disturbingly recent. Hale ordered the site sealed off immediately. Archaeologists were called in to examine the findings, but progress was slow. The carvings suggested rituals meant to appease or contain something, though their exact purpose remained unclear. Radiocarbon dating placed the oldest remains at over 500 years old, while the newest matched the timeline of the missing hikers. News of the discovery leaked to the press, sparking widespread speculation. Locals demanded the park be closed permanently, citing safety concerns. Others saw it as proof of the legends, arguing that the land itself was cursed. Authorities struggled to balance public fear with scientific inquiry, unsure how to proceed. For Detective Hale, the revelation brought both clarity and frustration. She finally understood why people vanished, but she couldn't explain what awaited them beneath the surface. Whatever force or entity resided in the tunnels, it defied logic and reason. All she could do was ensure no one else fell victim to its grasp. Years passed, and Red Ridge State Park became a ghost town. Fences surrounded the perimeter, warning signs posted every few feet. Rangers patrolled regularly, ensuring trespassers stayed away. Yet rumors persisted, spreading like wildfire through online forums and campfire stories. Some claimed to have seen lights flickering deep within the woods. Others swore they heard voices calling their names. Hale retired shortly after the case closed, unable to shake the weight of unanswered questions. She moved to a small cabin near the mountains, seeking solace in nature far removed from the park. Still, on quiet nights, she sometimes heard the wind carry whispers through the trees. They sounded like warnings, urging her to remember what she'd seen. Life continued for those touched by the disappearances, though scars lingered. Families honored their loved ones in private ways, lighting candles or planting trees in their memory. Strangers shared theories online, piecing together fragments of truth in hopes of finding peace. The park remained frozen in time, a monument to mysteries unresolved. Deep below the surface, the tunnels stretched endlessly, their secrets guarded by darkness. The triangular symbol glimmered faintly in the dim light, a silent sentinel watching over the remnants of those who dared to enter. And somewhere beyond the reach of human understanding, the shadows stirred. waiting for the next curious soul to cross their threshold. In the end, the story of Red Ridge State Park served as a reminder of humanity's fragile place in the world. For all our knowledge and technology, some questions remain beyond our grasp. We venture into the unknown not because we seek answers, but because we are drawn to the mystery itself. And sometimes, the mystery answers back. In this new story, the final radio call from this national park. Rangers at Red Pine National Forest still talk about the last transmission from Fire Tower 12. It came through just after midnight on a cold October night in 1998. The voice was calm but strained, reporting unusual activity near the North Ridge before cutting off abruptly. No one knows exactly what happened next. Mara Delaney worked the late shift at the park's main station that week. She was 42, tall and sturdy, with dark hair tied back in a practical ponytail. Her job mostly involved logging reports and managing supply runs for remote stations. That night, her goal was simple: finish updating the ranger logs by dawn so she could grab coffee at the diner before heading home to her cat. Around 11:30, Mara received a call from Daniel Haskins, stationed at Fire Tower 12. He sounded distracted, mentioning strange noises coming from the ridge. Mara noted it down like any other report, though something about his tone made her pause. She asked if he needed backup, but he brushed it off, saying he'd investigate further. Daniel's final transmission came less than an hour later. Dispatch recorded his voice clearly despite the poor signal. "There's movement out here," he said. "Something big, not an animal." Then silence. Attempts to reach him again failed. Each call met with static. Protocol required immediate action, but storms rolling and delayed search teams until morning. When Rangers finally reached Fire Tower 12, they found it locked up tight. Everything inside was orderly except for the logbook left open on the desk. A flashlight rested nearby with fresh batteries, suggesting Daniel planned to return soon. Outside, his boots remained by the door where he always left them before heading out on foot patrols. Detective Ron Harper led the investigation. He had 20 years of experience tracking missing persons cases in wilderness areas. At first glance, this seemed straightforward: another hiker or ranger gone astray. But details didn't add up. Daniel was meticulous, known for carrying emergency gear everywhere, yet his pack sat untouched inside the cabin. What caught Harper's attention were scuff marks near the edge of the North Ridge trailhead. Fresh dirt had been disturbed recently, not by weather, but by dragging. Boot prints overlapped erratically, indicating multiple trips back and forth within a short time frame. Oddly, some tracks appeared unusually large, much bigger than any standard hiking boot size. Local legends whispered about the North Ridge being cursed. Older residents spoke of strange lights dancing between trees late at night or eerie howls echoing through valleys. Most dismissed these tales as campfire stories meant to scare tourists. But now, even seasoned investigators glanced over their shoulders more often than usual. A week into the search, volunteers discovered an abandoned backpack partially buried under leaves 2 miles down the ridge. Inside, they found torn pieces of fabric matching Daniel's uniform shirt, along with several personal items: his pocket knife, a broken compass, and a crumpled photograph of his family. Scratch marks lined the interior of the bag, as if whatever carried it had clawed its way out. Harper examined the backpack closely, noting faint traces of blood on the fabric fragments. DNA analysis confirmed it belonged to Daniel, though the amount suggested minor injuries rather than life-threatening wounds. This discovery added another layer of confusion. Why would a trained ranger abandon his gear unless forced to? As winter approached, search efforts slowed due to harsh conditions. Snow blanketed the forest floor, erasing remaining clues. Yet every spring thaw brought renewed hope, prompting new searches each year. None yielded definitive answers, only more questions. Then came the audio recording found 3 years later. A hiker named Emily Torres set up her digital recorder near the North Ridge while camping overnight. Hoping to capture sounds of nocturnal animals, she instead captured something chilling: a man's voice whispering urgently, "They're watching. Don't follow me," followed by muffled footsteps fading into static. Audio experts analyzed the clip extensively, concluding it likely originated around the same time Daniel went missing. Torres remembered seeing posters about the missing ranger when she visited the area, but hadn't connected the dots until hearing the playback herself. She immediately turned over the file to authorities, sparking fresh interest in the cold case. Detectives combed through old witness statements again, focusing particularly on accounts mentioning shadows moving quickly between trees or figures glimpsed briefly before vanishing completely. One name surfaced repeatedly in those reports: Dr. Alan Pierce, a biologist who'd conducted research projects throughout Red Pine Forest during the past decade. Known for studying predator-prey dynamics, he occasionally collaborated with park rangers on conservation initiatives. However, several witnesses mentioned seeing him acting strangely near the North Ridge weeks before Daniel disappeared. Detective Harper tracked down Pierce's last known address, an isolated cabin deep within the woods. Neighbors described him as reclusive yet harmless, often disappearing for days at a time without explanation. When Harper arrived, however, the place appeared deserted. Dust covered every surface, suggesting no one had lived there for months. Still, certain details stood out. Stacks of maps marked with red circles concentrated around the North Ridge, journal entries detailing aggressive behavior observed in local wildlife populations, and photographs pinned to walls showing blurry images of humanoid shapes lurking among trees. Pierce himself remained elusive, having vanished shortly after Daniel's presumed death. Some speculated he might have fled after realizing investigators were closing in. Others believed he'd fallen victim to whatever fate befell the ranger. Either way, his absence complicated matters further. In recent months, technology offered new avenues for exploration. Drones, equipped with thermal imaging, flew over previously inaccessible parts of the forest, capturing footage that hinted at underground structures beneath the surface. Caverns, perhaps, or old mining tunnels long forgotten by official records. Could such places harbor secrets linking Pierce, Daniel, and the mysterious events surrounding the North Ridge? Despite advances in equipment and methodology, concrete evidence continued eluding authorities. The ranger logbook stayed frozen in time, forever ending with that solitary entry penned 8 years ago. For families seeking closure, friends mourning losses, and officers dedicated to solving mysteries, unanswered questions lingered heavily in the air. Yet amidst uncertainty, small victories emerged. Community groups formed to support families affected by disappearances in national parks nationwide. Awareness campaigns encouraged visitors to share GPS coordinates regularly and carry satellite phones when venturing into remote areas. Even locals who once scoffed at superstitions began acknowledging dangers inherent in nature's wild heartlands. As Detective Harper closed another fruitless season of searching, he paused beside the fire tower station, gazing toward the distant silhouette of Black Ridge Mountain. Somewhere out there lay truths waiting to be uncovered, stories demanding resolution. Until then, silence reigned supreme, broken only occasionally by wind rustling through ancient pines or imagined whispers drifting down from shadowy ridgelines above. And so life moved forward, carrying memories of Daniel Haskins alongside countless others lost within vast, untamed landscapes. Each autumn brought reminders of unanswered calls etched permanently into consciousness, urging future generations never to forget lessons learned nor cease striving for clarity amidst enigma's embrace. Years passed without resolution. Families of the missing continued seeking answers, holding on to hope despite mounting odds against finding loved ones alive. For Laura Meeks, the case remained open, a reminder of mysteries yet unsolved. She visited Fire Tower Station 12 annually, standing where Daniel last stood and imagining his final moments. The silence surrounding the ridge felt heavier each time, as if the mountain itself mourned losses it could neither explain nor rectify. Yet amidst uncertainty, Meeks found solace in small victories, lives saved through education, communities strengthened by shared grief, and knowledge gained through relentless pursuit of truth. Ultimately, the ranger log that stopped after one entry symbolized humanity's enduring quest for understanding. Whether driven by curiosity, necessity, or fear, we venture into unknown realms, knowing full well risks outweigh rewards. And though some journeys end abruptly, their legacies persist, urging future generations to tread cautiously while embracing wonder inherent in exploration. in this new story. This national park has a missing pattern rangers won't explain. Archived search summaries from a large national park contain repeated anomalies that never appear in public reports. Rangers noticed a pattern in missing person cases that did not align with terrain, weather, or visitor behavior, and the pattern was quietly ignored. The park covered thousands of square miles of mixed elevation wilderness. Dense forest filled the valleys, while exposed ridgelines cut across higher ground. Weather shifted quickly, and once visitors left paved roads, phone signals faded fast. People went missing there every year, which alone was not unusual. What unsettled experienced rangers was how certain details repeated afterward. Iron Talcott was 54 and worked as a field operations supervisor for the Park Service. He had spent more than 25 years rotating between patrol duty, search and rescue, and incident coordination. He believed strongly in data and procedure. Patterns mattered to him, especially when others dismissed them. The first case that bothered Iron involved a solo day hiker who vanished on a well-marked loop trail. The terrain was moderate, the weather clear, and daylight plentiful. The hiker's vehicle was found at the trailhead, locked and undisturbed. His phone showed normal movement until mid-afternoon. Then, everything stopped. Search teams responded quickly. Dogs tracked the hiker for a short distance, then stopped near a shallow bend in the trail where the ground dipped slightly and trees closed in. Beyond that point, there were no tracks, no broken branches, and no signs of struggle. The case was closed months later as probable disorientation. A year later, another hiker vanished under nearly identical circumstances. Same type of trail, same time of day, same weather conditions. Again, dogs lost the trail near a narrow corridor where visibility dropped briefly. Again, nothing was found beyond that point. Individually, each case was explainable. Together, they unsettled Iron. Over the next several years, the pattern repeated. Missing hikers were almost always alone. They vanished during late morning or early afternoon, not at night. Their last known locations clustered near specific trail segments. These were places where the trail dipped, curved sharply, or passed through dense stands of trees that briefly blocked sightlines. Most of the missing hikers were prepared. They carried water, food, and navigation tools. Many had prior experience in the park. Few were reckless or unfit. Weather was rarely extreme at the time of disappearance. What troubled Iron most was what search teams did not find. There were no long wandering tracks, no discarded gear scattered in panic, and no clear signs of injury. In many cases, there were no footprints at all beyond a short section of trail. It was as if people simply stopped existing within the landscape. Iron began keeping his own notes outside the official system. He logged dates, locations, trail types, and witness statements. When he mapped the disappearances, clusters emerged. Official summaries smoothed them out by labeling each case isolated. He brought the issue up once during a regional review meeting. The response was polite but firm. With millions of annual visitors, repetition was inevitable. Patterns could appear where none truly existed. Iron accepted the explanation publicly. Privately, he kept watching. The case that confirmed his concern involved a father and teenage son hiking together. The father walked several steps ahead on a narrow trail section. He rounded a bend in the path. When the son followed seconds later, his father was gone. There was no side trail, no drop-off, no dense brush immediately nearby. Search teams responded within hours. Dogs lost the trail at the same bend. The son insisted his father never left the path. He said the area felt quiet suddenly, like sound dropped away. That description matched several earlier witness statements. Quiet, still, empty. Iron realized the pattern was not about people getting lost. It was about where they vanished. Iron expanded his private review after that case, knowing he could no longer treat the similarities as coincidence. He requested access to older incident files stored off-site, reports rarely revisited because they predated digital indexing. The files were thin, handwritten in places, and often vague, yet the same language surfaced again and again. Missing near a bend. Lost after a short dip. Trail narrows. Sound carries poorly. He began comparing those notes with modern reports. The wording changed over the decades, but the circumstances did not. People vanished at points where the trail briefly removed visual certainty ahead while leaving the way behind seemingly intact. Rangers often described those segments as unremarkable, yet they appeared repeatedly in unresolved cases. Iron shared his findings quietly with two trusted colleagues, one from search and rescue and another from resource management. Both listened without interruption. Neither disagreed outright, but both cautioned him. Patterns without mechanisms were dangerous, especially when public safety messaging was involved. One colleague suggested terrain psychology. When trails narrow or dip, hikers adjust pace and attention. Small errors compound. Another suggested acoustic shadowing. In certain formations, wind and sound behave unpredictably, creating a sense of isolation. Those explanations accounted for discomfort. They did not account for disappearance without evidence. Iron requested permission to walk several of the trail segments himself. He did so during routine patrols, careful not to draw attention. At each site, he stopped where others had vanished and listened. The sensation was subtle but consistent. Sound felt muted. Footsteps ahead seemed closer than they were. Wind stalled, then returned abruptly a few steps later. None of it was dramatic. All of it was disorienting. He paid close attention to time perception. In those short corridors, minutes felt compressed. A few steps passed without memory of movement. It was enough to unsettle him, and he knew what to expect. During one patrol, Aaron accompanied a junior ranger unfamiliar with the pattern. When they reached a marked bend, the junior ranger slowed without prompting. He said the trail felt wrong. He could not explain why. Iron said nothing and kept walking. Back at headquarters, Iron overlaid the disappearance sites with geological maps. Several aligned loosely with shallow fault lines or areas of mixed bedrock. Those zones often produced irregular acoustics and subtle ground vibration. None were dangerous by themselves. Together, they formed corridors that altered perception briefly. He prepared a memorandum suggesting additional signage or patrol emphasis near those segments. The proposal was reviewed and quietly shelved. There was no justification for alarming visitors without clear evidence of risk. The resistance was not hostile. It was procedural. As years passed, new cases added weight to Iron's concern. A solo trail runner vanished on a clear morning. Dogs tracked her cleanly until a narrow rock corridor, then stopped. A retired couple reported losing sight of each other briefly near a wooded dip. They reunited moments later, shaken but unharmed. Each incident reinforced the same truth. The pattern did not guarantee disappearance. It only increased the chance of separation. Iron documented everything. He trained younger rangers to pay closer attention to certain trail segments without explaining why. He requested faster response times for calls originating near familiar bends. Officially, the park had no missing pattern. Unofficially, veteran rangers began sharing quiet warnings. Stay alert in the dips. Do not rush narrow corridors. If someone disappears from view, stop immediately and call out. Most visitors never noticed anything unusual. Millions passed through the park safely every year. The pattern did not announce itself loudly. It waited. Iron understood then why the pattern was never written down. To acknowledge it formally would require explaining something that could not be fixed with signs or fences. The land itself was not dangerous. It was selectively unforgiving. By the time Iron approached retirement, he had filled several notebooks. He did not know what caused the disappearances. He only knew where they were most likely to begin. And he knew the park would never say it out loud. As retirement approached, Iron was asked to prepare a transition briefing for the ranger who would replace him. Officially, the document covered staffing schedules, seasonal hazards, and radio protocols. Unofficially, Iron added a separate envelope marked training notes. Inside were copies of maps, excerpts from old reports, and a simple list of trail segments highlighted in pencil. No explanations were written, only dates and case numbers. The new supervisor asked about it once. Iron said the notes were for context, not instruction. He advised keeping them nearby during winter and shoulder seasons. After Iron left, nothing changed publicly. The park continued operating as it always had. Trail signs were updated for erosion, campsites were rotated, missing persons cases were handled individually, each one treated as isolated and unrelated. The pattern continued quietly. A few years later, a hiker was reported missing on a popular day trail. Search teams arrived quickly and worked the area with precision. Dogs tracked the hiker for several hundred yards, then stopped at a familiar bend. Rangers expanded the grid and found nothing beyond that point. The report used standard language. Probable disorientation. No signs of foul play. Another case followed months later. A photographer vanished during late morning hours on a clear day. His last known photo showed a narrow rock corridor with trees closing in on both sides. The image timestamp placed him minutes before the bend. No further evidence was found. Veteran rangers noticed the same things Iron once had. The quiet, the way sound behaved, the places where people disappeared from view without explanation. They shared concerns only with each other, never in writing. New rangers learned through experience. They noticed which calls made older colleagues pause before responding. They noticed which trail segments triggered faster mobilization even when reports sounded routine. During one training exercise, a junior ranger asked why a particular bend was included in every winter briefing. The instructor said it was a spot where people tended to make mistakes. That was the only explanation offered. Privately, rangers avoided patrolling those segments alone when conditions were quiet and visibility dropped. They slowed their pace, they listened longer, they waited for partners to stay within sight. Visitors were never warned explicitly. The Park Service believed strongly in not creating fear where none could be clearly justified. Millions of people walked those trails without incident. The pattern did not target most people. It targeted moments. Moments when someone stepped forward while trusting the path behind them. Moments when visibility collapsed briefly. Moments when sound dropped away just long enough for separation to occur. The land did not need to act. It only needed to allow distance to open. Iron returned to the park once after retirement. He walked one of the familiar trails alone in early autumn. When he reached a shallow dip, he stopped and waited. The forest felt still. Sound softened. The world ahead felt closer than it was. He stepped forward again, and the feeling passed immediately. Nothing dramatic happened. Nothing needed to. That was the part most people never understood. The disappearances did not come from danger that announced itself. They came from places that felt ordinary until they did not. Iron left the park that afternoon and never returned. His notebooks remained archived but uncatalogued. Officially, there was no missing pattern. Among rangers, there was an understanding that could not be formalized. Certain places did not take people often. They only needed to take them occasionally. And when they did, the trail would close behind them so cleanly that no one could explain where they went. In this new story, this national park has too many last known locations. Internal case reviews from a major national park revealed a detail that rarely appeared in public summaries. Too many missing person cases ended with a clear last known location, yet no case ever moved forward from that point. The park spanned thousands of square miles of varied terrain. Dense forests filled lower elevations, while open ridges and rocky basins dominated higher ground. Visitors disappeared there every year, which alone was not unusual. What concerned veteran staff was how often searches stopped at a specific moment rather than a specific place. Soren Hale was 56 and worked as the park's incident review coordinator. His role began after active searches ended. He analyzed outcomes, timelines, and response efficiency. He did not deploy teams or walk trails regularly anymore. His job was to find where investigations stalled and why. Over time, one phrase appeared too often in his reports: last known location confirmed. In theory, a last known location should help. It narrowed search areas, defined timelines, and guided deployment. In this park, it seemed to do the opposite. Cases reached that point and then froze. The first file Soren revisited involved a solo backpacker who vanished during a 3-day route. His vehicle was located at a trailhead. His campsite was found intact on the second night. Rangers identified the exact spot where he was last seen by other hikers the following morning. The trail beyond that point was clear and visible. Search teams found nothing past it. No tracks, no disturbed ground, no broken vegetation. Dogs lost the scent within yards of the last known location. The report closed months later without recovery. At the time, it was considered unfortunate but ordinary. Then Soren noticed the same structure repeating. Another hiker disappeared on a popular ridge trail. Multiple witnesses confirmed seeing her near a rest point late in the morning. Rangers reached the spot within hours. They marked it precisely with GPS. Beyond that marker, nothing. No evidence suggested she left the trail, no signs of injury appeared nearby, weather was stable, visibility was good. The search ended weeks later without answers. Soren overlaid the cases chronologically. Over 15 years, more than a dozen disappearances shared the same shape. A strong last known location followed by total absence. The cases differed in age, experience, and season. Some involved solo hikers, others involved groups that briefly separated, a few involved trail runners or photographers. Yet every investigation stopped at a clean edge. Soren began flagging the files quietly. He noticed something else. The last known locations were rarely dramatic. They were not cliff edges or dangerous crossings. They were ordinary places, flat trail sections, gentle bends, open viewpoints. Witnesses often described the missing person as calm moments earlier. One report quoted a companion saying the hiker stepped ahead to take photos. Another said the missing runner rounded a corner just seconds before vanishing from sight. In several cases, witnesses mentioned a sudden, quiet-like ambient sound dropped briefly. Soren requested original ranger notes and canine logs for deeper review. The language used by handlers stood out. Trail ends cleanly. No drift, no widening search. That phrasing appeared again and again. In one case, a handler wrote that the dog behaved as if the person stopped existing at the marked point. The comment was removed from the final report. Soren brought his concerns to a regional review meeting once. He framed it carefully, focusing on procedure rather than implication. Why were so many cases ending with confirmed last known locations that led nowhere? The response was measured. Last known locations were common in missing person cases. It meant witnesses existed, it meant timelines were reliable, there was nothing inherently suspicious. Soren accepted the explanation outwardly. Privately, he kept reviewing. He plotted every last known location on a map. Clusters emerged, but not tightly enough to justify action. The commonality was not geography. It was finality. Each location marked a point where movement stopped without explanation. Not slowed, not redirected, stopped. Soren realized the problem was not that the park had too many missing people. It had too many endings. And every ending looked the same. Soren pushed deeper into the files after that realization, focusing less on who went missing and more on what happened immediately afterward. He reconstructed timelines minute by minute, comparing response speed, weather changes, and witness proximity. The outcome was always the same. The search reached the last known location quickly, then stalled. In several cases, teams arrived within 2 hours. In others, they arrived within minutes. Speed did not matter. Once the last known location was established, progress stopped cold. Soren reviewed witness statements again, this time paying attention to what people noticed rather than what they did. Certain phrases appeared repeatedly across unrelated cases. It went quiet. Sound felt flat. I thought they were just ahead of me. I only looked away for a second. None of those statements sounded like panic. They sounded like confusion. He requested access to unedited radio traffic from several searches. In early transmissions, field teams sounded confident. Once they reached the last known location, the tone shifted. Voices slowed. Questions repeated. Silence between transmissions grew longer. No one said it out loud, but the same thing happened every time. Teams did not know where to go next. Canine reports reinforced that problem. Dogs tracked cleanly to the last known location, then stopped. Handlers used the same language again and again. Scent terminates. No lateral movement. No indication of departure. In one internal note that never reached a final report, a handler wrote that the dog behaved as if the trail had been lifted straight up. That line was removed during editing. Soren met privately with a senior search manager who had worked in the park for decades. The man listened carefully, then gave a cautious answer. He said last known locations created false confidence. Everyone assumed the person must have moved somewhere nearby. When nothing appeared, the assumption broke, and so did momentum. Soren asked if the manager had noticed how often that happened in this park. The man paused longer than expected, then said some places did that more than others. He did not elaborate. Soren next examined terrain features surrounding the last known locations. He expected to find common hazards, but there were none. No cliffs, no fast water, no dense brush. The locations were deliberately ordinary. That was what made them effective stopping points. He consulted a behavioral specialist who worked with outdoor incident response teams. The specialist reviewed summaries without location data. Her conclusion surprised him. She said the disappearances occurred at points where human attention naturally relaxed: flat ground, clear trail, no perceived threat. People lowered their guard there. Groups spread out, individuals stepped ahead briefly, visual contact broke for seconds rather than minutes. Soren realized something important. The park did not have too many last known locations because people vanished often. It had too many because the environment produced clean breaks in awareness. Once awareness broke, evidence vanished with it. Internally, Soren proposed a change in documentation. He suggested recording not just where someone was last seen, but what the environment was doing at that moment: sound, visibility, spacing between people. The proposal was rejected as impractical. Administrators wanted locations, coordinates, times, clean data. Soren kept his own notes. Over the next few years, new cases added weight to his concern. A trail runner disappeared seconds after passing a group heading the opposite direction. A photographer vanished after stepping a few yards ahead to frame a shot. In both cases, witnesses provided precise last known locations. In both cases, searches ended there. Soren noticed that public communication emphasized reassurance. The park was safe. These were rare events. Visitors should not worry. Internally, response times near familiar last known locations became faster, not slower. Rangers began to recognize certain spots instinctively. When a call came in naming one of them, preparations changed subtly. More personnel, faster deployment, lower expectations. Soren understood then why the pattern was never acknowledged. Admitting it would mean admitting that knowing where someone was last seen did not always help. Sometimes it meant the search had already reached its end. He labeled the phenomenon privately: terminal locations. Places where movement stopped, evidence stopped, and explanation stopped. The final case Soren reviewed before leaving the role arrived during a quiet summer week, the kind that usually passed without incident. A couple hiking a popular loop trail stopped at a junction to rest. Other visitors passed them without noticing anything unusual. When the couple stood to continue, only one of them stepped forward. The missing hiker was last seen standing on packed dirt beside a trail sign. Witnesses confirmed the time within minutes. Rangers reached the junction quickly. They marked the exact spot. Dogs tracked to the sign and stopped. There were no prints leading off, no disturbed ground, no reason to choose any direction over another. The report closed the same way as the others. Soren assembled the year-end review and wrote the summary in careful language. Response times were excellent, resources were deployed appropriately, evidence was limited beyond the last known location. The conclusion met every requirement. After submitting it, he added a final note to his private file. He wrote that last known locations were being treated as beginnings when they were functioning as endings. He wrote that the park did not lack information. It had too much certainty at the wrong moment. When Soren transferred out, his replacement inherited the same system. Publicly, nothing changed. The park continued to emphasize preparedness, buddy systems, and staying on marked trails. Those messages were correct and necessary. Privately, rangers adapted in small ways. They discouraged spacing out in areas that felt ordinary. They asked partners to keep visual contact longer than usual. They slowed groups at junctions and viewpoints without explaining why. The pattern persisted. Another hiker vanished after rounding a gentle curve just beyond a rest area. Another runner disappeared after passing a family headed the opposite direction. Each time, witnesses provided a precise last known location. Each time, the search reached it and stopped. Soren returned to the park once after stepping away from incident review. He stood at a familiar junction and watched people move through it. Most passed without pause, some lingered, none sensed anything wrong. That was the part that mattered. The places were not dangerous. They were comfortable. They invited attention to drift just enough for separation to happen without warning. Soren left without filing anything new. His private notes remained uncatalogued. Officially, there was no issue with last known locations. There were signs of good reporting and quick response. Among those who worked the cases, there was a quieter understanding. Knowing where someone was last seen did not always move a search forward. Sometimes it marked the exact point where the story ended. The park still has trails, junctions, overlooks, and rest areas that look like any others. People still pass through them every day and return safely. But the park also has too many last known locations, and rangers know that when a call names one of them, the search will reach that point quickly. What happens after that is rarely written down in this new story. The ranger log that stopped after one entry. Blackridge Mountain had always been a place of mystery, even before Daniel Haskins' disappearance. Its dense forests and jagged cliffs seemed to swallow light whole, leaving behind an eerie stillness that unnerved even the most seasoned outdoorsmen. Locals often spoke of how the mountain changed personalities, with the seasons gentle and inviting in spring, brooding and hostile in winter. But it was autumn when the mountain truly came alive, its rustling leaves and shifting shadows whispering secrets only it understood. To those who lived near Red Pine National Forest, Blackridge was both a blessing and a curse. It provided timber, game, and breathtaking vistas for tourists, but it also harbored dangers few dared to confront. Over the years, several people had vanished without a trace within its confines, their stories becoming cautionary tales told around campfires. Some said the mountain claimed those who disrespected it. Others believed there was something ancient and malevolent lurking beneath its surface. Daniel Haskins had always dismissed these tales as superstition. He'd spent 9 years patrolling Fire Tower Station 12, and not once had he encountered anything supernatural. Yet, on that fateful night in October 17, 2018, he heard something that made him question everything he thought he knew about the mountain. It began with faint noises, scratching sounds like branches scraping against each other, but they didn't match any wind patterns or animal movements he'd ever heard. They came from the North Ridge, an area notorious for being difficult to navigate due to its steep inclines and treacherous terrain. Haskins grabbed his flashlight and headed out, leaving behind the warmth of the station and stepping into the cold embrace of the forest. What he found, or what found him, is still unknown. The last thing he wrote in the logbook was, "Heard unusual noises from the North Ridge. Investigating further." Those words haunted everyone involved in the case because they suggested intentionality. Whatever caused those noises wanted attention, and Haskins had given it exactly what it sought. For Deputy Sheriff Laura Meeks, the case was personal. She'd grown up in Willow Creek, the small town nearest Red Pine National Forest, and knew many families affected by disappearances over the years. Her own uncle had gone missing during a hunting trip decades ago, his fate never determined. When she joined law enforcement, she vowed to bring closure to such cases, no matter how long they took. Haskins' disappearance hit close to home. Not only was he a colleague, but he was also someone she respected deeply. He'd taught her survival skills when she was younger, showing her how to read maps and track animals. She remembered him as patient and kind, traits that made his sudden vanishing all the more unsettling. When search teams failed to find any concrete evidence after weeks of combing the area, Meeks refused to give up. She revisited every detail of the investigation, poring over witness statements, analyzing photographs, and retracing Haskins' final steps. Something about the abandoned backpack bothered her, the scratch marks inside, the torn fabric, the traces of blood. It wasn't consistent with an animal attack, nor did it seem entirely human. Her instincts told her this wasn't just another random tragedy. There was a pattern here, subtle but undeniable. Over the past decade, at least 5 individuals had disappeared under similar circumstances, experienced outdoors people venturing into remote areas, leaving behind minimal clues, and never returning. Each incident occurred in late autumn, always near the North Ridge. Meeks decided to dig deeper into these earlier cases, hoping to find connections. She reached out to families, reviewed old police reports, and interviewed anyone who might have information. One name kept appearing: Dr. Alan Pierce. Dr. Alan Pierce was a biologist specializing in predator-prey dynamics, but his work extended beyond conventional science. Colleagues described him as brilliant yet eccentric, someone who immersed himself so deeply in research that he often lost touch with reality. He'd spent years studying Red Pine National Forest, documenting behaviors of wolves, bears, and other apex predators. His findings were groundbreaking, but some questioned his methods, particularly his habit of venturing alone into dangerous territories. Pierce's fascination with the North Ridge became apparent during interviews. Several park rangers recalled him mentioning strange phenomena there, unexplained growls, glowing eyes in the dark, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. At first, they assumed it was part of his eccentricity, but now those accounts took on new significance. Detective Ron Harper, who joined the investigation later, found Pierce's cabin abandoned but filled with cryptic notes. Among them was a journal entry dated October 15, 2018, just 2 days before Haskins' disappearance. It read, "Subject exhibits behavior unlike any documented species. Nocturnal activity increases significantly post-sunset. Appears intelligent, possibly territorial. Avoid direct confrontation unless absolutely necessary." Accompanying the text were sketches of humanoid figures with elongated limbs and sharp features, their eyes hollow and menacing. Harper couldn't determine whether these drawings represented real observations or products of an overactive imagination. Either way, they added another layer of intrigue to the case. Emily Torres' discovery of the audio recording 3 years later reignited interest in the case. The clip, though brief, contained chilling implications. Experts analyzed the voice, confirming it belonged to a male speaker, likely Haskins. However, the phrase, "they're watching, don't follow me," raised questions about whom or what he referred to. Torres herself became a key figure in the investigation. A graduate student studying environmental acoustics, she possessed equipment capable of capturing sounds imperceptible to the human ear. During her camping trip, she recorded numerous clips, most of which featured typical nocturnal noises, owls hooting, insects chirping, and distant waterfalls. But one segment stood apart. At approximately 11:30 p.m., the recorder picked up low-frequency vibrations accompanied by faint whispers. These voices overlapped, creating an almost hypnotic rhythm. Audio analysts identified multiple layers within the sound wave, suggesting different sources speaking simultaneously. While the primary voice matched Haskins, others remained unidentifiable, their tones guttural and distorted. Further analysis revealed anomalies in the frequency spectrum. Certain pitches fell outside the range of natural sounds, hinting at artificial manipulation. This led some researchers to speculate about advanced technology or even extraterrestrial involvement, though such theories lacked substantial evidence. Despite skepticism, Torres' recording inspired renewed efforts to explore the North Ridge. Teams equipped with drones and thermal imaging devices scoured the area, uncovering signs of underground structures. Caverns and tunnels hinted at a hidden world beneath the forest floor, potentially linked to the disappearances. As news of the ongoing investigation spread, the community rallied together. Vigils were held for Haskins and others who'd vanished, while fundraisers supported search and rescue operations. Local schools incorporated safety lessons into their curricula, emphasizing the importance of preparation and communication when exploring wilderness areas. Some residents, however, grew fearful. Rumors circulated about shadowy figures seen wandering the woods at night, their silhouettes indistinct yet unmistakably human. Others reported hearing disembodied voices or feeling an oppressive presence while hiking near the North Ridge. Even skeptics admitted to experiencing unease in certain parts of the forest. In response, authorities increased patrols and installed additional surveillance cameras. Rangers received training on handling potential encounters with unidentified entities, though no official statement acknowledged the possibility of supernatural elements. Instead, officials focused on practical measures, urging visitors to stay on marked trails and report suspicious activity immediately. Detective Ron Harper spent countless hours piecing together fragments of the puzzle. Though definitive answers eluded him, he developed a theory based on available evidence. According to Harper, whatever happened to Haskins and possibly others was tied to the North Ridge's unique geography. Geologists confirmed the presence of mineral deposits capable of amplifying electromagnetic signals. Combined with the region's isolation and dense vegetation, these conditions created an environment conducive to auditory hallucinations and disorientation. Historical records indicated indigenous tribes once avoided the area, believing it housed spirits hostile to outsiders. Harper speculated that Haskins stumbled upon something, perhaps remnants of an ancient ritual site or remnants of modern experiments conducted secretly. Whatever it was, it triggered a chain reaction resulting in his disappearance. The same could be true for Dr. Alan Pierce, whose obsession with the ridge may have led him too far down a dangerous path. While Harper's hypothesis offered plausible explanations, it left room for interpretation. Was the North Ridge truly cursed, as locals claimed? Or was it simply a convergence of natural and psychological factors creating illusions of the paranormal? Years passed without resolution. Families of the missing continued seeking answers, holding on to hope despite mounting odds against finding loved ones alive. For Laura Meeks, the case remained open, a reminder of mysteries yet unsolved. She visited Fire Tower Station 12 annually, standing where Haskins last stood and imagining his final moments. The silence surrounding the ridge felt heavier each time, as if the mountain itself mourned losses it could neither explain nor rectify. Yet, amidst uncertainty, Meeks found solace in small victories, lives saved through education, communities strengthened by shared grief, and knowledge gained through relentless pursuit of truth. Ultimately, the ranger log that stopped after one entry symbolized humanity's enduring quest for understanding. Whether driven by curiosity, necessity, or fear, we venture into unknown realms knowing full well risks outweigh rewards. And though some journeys end abruptly, their legacies persist, urging future generations to tread cautiously while embracing wonder inherent in exploration.